That was Pascal's wager. Now let's try and assess the argument and see whether it's sound and potentially convincing to the reasonable agnostic. So one thing you might immediately be suspicious about is premise 2. And there's a host of objections that people have given to premise 2. And some of them, there's a collection that have a very similar form. And so let's consider those one by one here. OK, first, let's call this the many gods objection to Pascal's wager. So wait a second here. I have, we've made it out that I just have two options: believing in God, being an atheist, not believing in God. But in reality, there are many different gods in which I might choose to believe. There's the Hindu God, the Christian God, the Muslim God, the Jewish God, the, I don't know, there's Buddhist God. There's tons of different gods. Which of them should I believe in? I mean, just as, say, we could have argued, well, as we did, that believing in the Christian God had infinite expected utility. That was what Pascal thought. So the same kind of argument could have been given for believing in the Hindu God. Maybe if we believe in the Hindu God will reward us with life in heaven. Just so long as we think there is some chance that that's correct, then believing in the Hindu God has infinite expected utility. And we can say the same for not just the established religions, but all kinds of strange and imaginary gods. Let's take the god of MIT. You probably think there isn't a god of MIT. But just so long as you think there's some chance, albeit so unlikely, just has to be something, that there is a god of MIT who rewards believers in the god of MIT with eternity in heaven, then believing in the god of MIT will have infinite expected value for you. So what you really face is a whole array of options. Believing in the Christian God, which is what Pascal would have recommended that you believe in, believing in the Hindu God, believing in the Buddhist God and so forth, believing in the God of MIT, believing in the God of the trees, believing in the God of yourself. There's a vast array of options. And each one of them has infinite expected value. So it's not so obvious that the right way to respond to Pascal's argument is to say the rational thing to do is to believe, as he did, in the Christian God. All that it appears to say for what we said so far is that in light of what he said, you ought to believe in some God. That's the many gods objection to Pascal's wager. And it readily extends to an argument that Pascal didn't really give us any reason to believe in any God at all. It's not just he didn't give us reason to believe in the Christian God as he did. He didn't give us reason really to believe in any God at all. Because just as we can't rule out the possibility that there's a God of MIT, so we can't rule out the possibility that there's a generous God. What would a generous God be? Well, a generous God would be a God who rewards believers with life in heaven, and then when the non-believers come to him, thinks, I'll give them life in heaven too. So believers and non-believers alike get life in heaven from this generous God. They get eternity in heaven. Given that you can't rule out this possibility, the outcomes associated with believing in God are really these. First, there's you living the life of a dissolute life of a non-believer and ceasing to exist. That's it. Second, there's your living the dissolute life of a non-believer and then being given, in any case, life in heaven. Cool the probability you associate with the latter outcome, call it P generous God. That's the probability you associate with there being a generous God who's going to give you life in heaven even if you don't believe in him. Just so long as that number is greater than 0, just so long as you think there's some chance that there is such a God, then the expected value for you of not believing is likewise going to be infinite. It's just the probability you associate with a generous God multiplied by infinity, so that's some non-zero number multiplied by infinity, plus the probability you associate with there being no generous God multiplied by the value for you of living a dissolute life, followed by no heaven. And so both believing in God and not believing in God will have infinite expected value. So it's not particularly rational to believe in God, because by doing so, you don't maximize expected value. Third objection, the weird God's objection to Pascal's wager. Does believing in God really have infinite expected utility? Because just as you can't rule out the possibility that there's a God who rewards believers in him with life in heaven, nor can you really rule out the possibility that there's a weird God who rewards believers in God with an eternity in hell. I mean, just as you associate some non-zero chance with the former, so you're surely going to associate some non-zero chance with the latter. But supposing you do associate non-zero chance with the latter, then there's a further outcome that you need to consider when you're trying to compute the expected value of believing in God. That's this. Maybe you'll live the devout life of a believer and go to hell. The probability you associate with that, call that the probability of there being a weird God, P weird God, has to be multiplied by the value for you of you're living the devout life of a believer and then going to hell. Surely that's negative infinity. So the expected value of believing in God is going to turn out to be P God multiplied by infinity plus P no God multiplied by the value for you of living a devout life followed by nothing, plus P weird God multiplied by negative infinity. Now, adding infinity to negative infinity is a tricky matter. Typically we say that there's no number that you get when you add infinity to negative infinity. The value then, expected value, is undefined. And indeed, the expected value of all the options open to you here is going to be similarly undefined. So it's not that by believing in God you maximize expected value. Believing in God has no defined expected value. In reply to these three objections, a follower of Pascal could say this. Look, when infinite costs and benefits are at stake, it's not like the only rational imperative is to maximize expected value. That's clearly not right. So, suppose that I was to offer you two options. Option one, you get to go to heaven for your, there's an afterlife and you get to go to heaven. Okay? That's pretty great. You have an eternity of heaven that you're faced with. Option two, there's an afterlife and I'll give you a 1 in 6 chance of spending all of it in heaven. It doesn't seem like a very hard choice. I mean, which option should you take? Of course, you should take the first option. Anybody would take the first option. Any rational person would take the first option. First option clearly beats the second one. And yet, of course, the way we've defined expected value up to now, the first option has infinite expected value, the second option has infinite expected value. Expected value of the first is just 1 times infinity. Expected value, the second, it's just a sixth times infinity plus 5/6 times whatever value you associate with not spending eternity in heaven. Infinite either way. So any account of rationality that says all you've got to do is maximize expected value is clearly a bad account of rationality. I just gave an example of a case where there's clearly one option that's the rational one to take, even though it's not the option that maximizes expected value. So in these cases where infinite rewards are at stake, we need to expand upon our account of rationality. The natural way to do it is this. So if there's some number, n, such that if we set the value of the infinite reward at n, then the expected value of a particular option is greater than the expected value of all other options. And furthermore, if we set the value of the infinite reward at any finite number higher than n, then the expected value of that same option comes out as higher than the expected value of all other options. Then we rationally ought to take that first option. It's a bit of a complicated idea, but it gives us the right results, which is that you ought to take the certain eternity over heaven over the 1/6 of a chance of eternity in heaven. And it gives us a response to these many gods, weird gods, punitive gods, generous gods, objections to Pascal's wager. Because it's going to turn out that just so long as you think it's very slightly more likely that you'll get eternity in heaven if you believe in a particular kind of God, rather than doing anything else, believing in another kind of God or not believing in God, then that is rationally what you ought to be doing. You rationally ought to be doing this thing, the thing that gives you the best chance, no matter how small, of getting to heaven.